G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Because of this pesky 15-minute upload limit at the moment, I'm going to split Outsiders into two parts. First Dog on the Moon will be in part 2, this is part 1.
Time now for our weekly browse of the Sunday tabloids. Now, once upon a time, when national leaders sought to address the nation on an issue of significance, they might have delivered a stirring address to the Parliament, or perhaps turned to a national radio network. Good morning. Today, well, obvious, that leader would do what Tony Abbott has done and penned a column for the Sunday Telegraph. That is, after all, the media megaphone that makes weekly delivery of the fresh thoughts of Piers Ackerman. So it's a byword for influence. And so it is today that the Prime Minister takes pride of place on the Sunday Telly's opinion pages, along with various other cutting-edge pieces of social and political observation. For it is here that you will read
why Duchess Kate can't avoid droopy boobs,
and perhaps be tempted by columnist Claire Harvey's sobering account of how
Jaws has haunted me my entire life,
before inevitably turning to Miranda Devine, where this morning we learn how
leftist troublemakers try to divide Australians and downplay terror threats.
According to Devine,
it is not mythical bigots, but leftist troublemakers who try to divide Australians and sow distrust as they downplay the seriousness of the terror threat and imagine grand conspiracies.
But we leave Miranda's imagined grand conspiracy of leftist troublemakers there for the moment and turn back to the Prime Minister, whose message today is one of simple reassurance to a rattled Commonwealth. For, as he writes,
this week the murderous rage in the Middle East threatened to erupt in the heart of Australia. ISIL reaches out with deadly purpose from Iraq and Syria to the other states of the Middle East, and it reaches out to us as well.
That, says the PM, is
the reality of the terror threat that Australia faces.
However,
I can assure you that your government will do whatever is humanly possible to keep our country safe.
Thus reassured, we might press on with our Sunday reading, for the Sunday Telly also carries news this morning of
cell block terror.
For yes, not even the nation's prisons are safe haven from the long and undoubtedly hairy arm of terrorism. For it is here that
convicted terrorists are using sophisticated codes, vulnerable inmates called sweepers, and a network of visitors to run their hate campaign from inside our most secure prison.
What? We should lock them up. Oh, wait. Alternatively, we could seek the comparatively sedate sanctuary of this morning's Sun Herald, which today tells the tale of how
rates pay for brothel sex.
An optional extra to the traditional three-part offering of local government, roads, rates and rubbish. No, the story of Fred Allen, not his real name, and a unique job offer.
3 years ago, Fred Allen was a taxi driver working 12-hour shifts to make ends meet. Today, he's a gun for hire, having received tens of thousands of dollars from Sydney's metropolitan councils in exchange for crucial evidence that is presented in court to help expose and close underground parlours. In short, Mr. Allen has paid sex with prostitutes and ratepayers foot the bill.
So there it is, roads, rates, rubbish and rooting out the scourge of unregulated sex work. Right, said Fred, not his real name. Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. Truly that is so. Thank you, Barry, and joining you all for Outsiders this week. Professor Sarah Joseph, she's Director of the Caston Centre for Human Rights Law at Melbourne's Monash University. And Abbas El-Zain, he's a writer and academic, and James Allen, he's Garrick Professor of Law at the University of Queensland. Welcome to you all. Here's a little spot of our Foreign Minister speaking in New York overnight.
We cannot leave the people and government of Iraq to face this cruelty alone. ISIL's actions leave in no doubt the severity of the threat to the region and the wider world. It poses a threat to Australia, our friends in Southeast Asia and beyond.
Jim Allen, we know we're committing troops, we're committing aircraft to an effort in Iraq. Is there an aspect of the discussion currently which has been sufficiently debated in this country?
I'm not really sure what you're getting at, Jonathan. The French have had airstrikes in Iraq in the last couple of days. We know that, a million plus people have been displaced, thousands have been killed, enslaved, beheaded. I'm not sure, I mean, you can be a complete and total isolationist in foreign policy and do nothing, but I didn't hear anyone advocating that in Serbia when the Serbs were romping around massacring people. So, I mean, it is a line of thought in foreign policy to absolutely do nothing, but it's not one that too many people actually advocate over a lengthy period of time. And if you're not going to just sit back and do nothing, you have to decide how you're going to do things and when. It's not an easy call. I'm not purporting to be an expert on that, but I would have thought that these people who are romping around beheading and enslaving are some of the most sort of dastardly people going. So I don't think airstrikes alone will actually do it. I don't think anyone I've read thinks that airstrikes alone will do it. So what we really need is to get some of the countries in the neighborhood to get in there and deal with these people. In fact, you might read, Sarah Joseph, to the contrary, that airstrikes might have a counter effect that may, in fact, only strengthen, embolden the people that we're attacking, the people that we're trying to subdue.
Well, as Jim has just said, there doesn't seem a lot of people who are arguing that this war is going to work, that it will actually succeed. So the one thing that we do know is that it is likely to fuel radicalism. And I never said that. I'm not want to be put in that group. I'm not saying you said that, Jim, but I'm saying that many people, including myself, believe that it will undoubtedly fuel radicalism. And I'm not saying that we should conduct our foreign policy in a way that appeals to militant extremists, but when a decision has no we're not sure of any other likely outcome, it should be a consideration. Your original question, Jonathan, was about whether it's been properly debated in this country. I think one thing I'd like to say is I think it's very disappointing that both major parties are so resistant to a debate about this in Parliament. They do have, we've seen John Kerry yesterday talking to Congress about the decision in the US. The UK has parliamentary debates. I don't see why we can't have one.
Abbas, this seems to be an issue that leaves us a little bit starved of options. There is a lot of discussion about whether military force would be effective, and yet it would seem that military force is also necessary. Do we actually have a solution? I mean, what is a solution to the issue that we confront?
Look, I think I agree that the situation is such a mess at the moment in Iraq and Syria, and the rise of ISIS and all the barbarism that is being practiced by ISIS means that the option of not intervening is a little bit harder to defend. Unlike the situation in 2003 when we went into Iraq, it's quite different. However, I do agree with Sarah, and going back to your question about are we debating this question properly, it's not just a question about whether we go or not, it's a question of how we go and if we're going, for what purpose exactly. There's one obvious purpose, which is to stem the rise of ISIS, but this is happening in the context of much bigger changes that are taking place in Syria and Iraq. I want to draw attention to the recent book by Malcolm Fraser, in which he talks about the way we decided to go into Vietnam back in the 60s, when he was, I think at the beginning, Minister for the Army, and then became Minister for Defense. And one of the things he said was that the Americans, when the Americans talked to the Australian government, they conveyed the fact that the reports they were receiving all said that the war in Vietnam is winnable. What the Australian government didn't know, because the Australian government wasn't told by the US government, with a whole set of CIA reports that had reached the opposite conclusion. And what Malcolm Fraser was saying is that had we known this, we would not have gone to Vietnam. What worries me today is that it's not a question of not getting the full answer. It's that we're not even asking the questions. I think there's a few assumptions that we are making that our interest and those of the United States are aligned. Now, why they might not be? And I just want to ask a question, which is how do we prevent us having this conversation in 10 years from now? We had something similar.
So that's there's that sense of the potential of war without end here, isn't there, Jim Allen? And
constant crisis management.
Jim, get your thought on that, because the pattern here is a familiar one, is it not?
Well, firstly, I mean, this idea that the Americans have been a hotbed of consultation, I think the way that Sarah characterized that is wrong. John Kerry may have talked to Congress, but President Obama has reactivated the bombing raids based on a 13-year-old resolution under President Bush. So the idea that they've been consulting with Congress is wrong, and he would be leery of doing that to any great extent. I'm guessing President Obama. As for Malcolm Fraser, I mean, I think he's about the last person I'd be taking advice on the American alliance. Clearly, there's a problem here, and if there were an easy way of dealing with it, then people would have figured it out. We are dealing with a volatile area of the world, and if you get involved, it's possible that will have implications. But on the other hand, just to sit back and watch, people being rounded up, people being beheaded, people being enslaved. I mean, if you're going to make the argument that we should do nothing, let's hear you do it openly and say you're an isolationist, and stop pretending that you want your cake and eat it too.
We shouldn't do nothing, clearly, but should we also be aware of the fact that in doing something which is obviously necessary and clearly has great humanitarian benefit, we might also be having the opposite effect of which we intend?
Well, I mean, it's not very often that I line up with Tanya Plebersek, but she was on the radio the other day with Waleed Ali, and she said, well, what are you suggesting, that we have a good talking to ISIS? I mean, what is it you're suggesting if you don't actually actively go in with military force?
I'm suggesting that we should have...
What are you talking about?
I'm suggesting that we should have, and I think, Sarah, your thoughts on this, but possibly a broader discussion that says, yes, we should do that, but that is not the end of the story, that we need to accept that this issue is more complicated than one that is potentially resolved by airstrikes.
Australia is going to affect ISIS all that much.
Well, it may not, but I think there's an inherent arrogance in the assumption that we can definitely fix this. And in fact, we're going into this almost with our eyes wide open, quite reluctantly acknowledging that we probably can't fix this. And so there is a danger that this could make things worse. I mean, the history of Western interventions recently has not been particularly good. I'm not sure that Afghanistan is in good shape. Iraq is clearly in very bad shape right now. And Libya, where there seemed to be quite a victory 3 years ago, is also falling apart. So I think there does need to be some sober discussions about what is the best thing to do. There should also be some clarification of what we are trying to achieve. Is the motive a humanitarian one? Is the motive to protect Australia? Is it both? If it's humanitarian, unfortunately there is no shortage of humanitarian crises in the world right now which we don't think about intervening in. We don't intervene in the Central African Republic. We don't intervene in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We haven't had a particularly robust response to the Ebola crisis in Western Africa. So I think these are things to discuss. It's not just a question of saying, oh, you're an isolationist, oh, you preach doing nothing. It is a question of trying to work out what is the right thing to do rather than just leaping in, realizing that what we're, even acknowledging that what we're doing may well not work.
This is Outsiders on Sunday Extra. Sarah Joseph, you just heard, Abbas Elvain with you as well, and Jim Allen. And Abbas,
can I pick up on what Sarah said? Sorry, Jonathan. I fully agree.
And owing to the approaching 15-minute upload limit, here endeth part 1.